The metallic slam of handcuffs echoed through Priscilla Huntington Smith's pristine marble foyer as FBI agents led her away in her tennis whites. Her perfectly manicured nails clawed at the arrest warrant while she screamed about some misunderstanding with medical billing codes. The irony wasn't lost on me watching from my driveway as they hauled off the woman who'd spent 8 months trying to destroy my life. She had no idea that the quiet surgeon next door had been meticulously documenting every fraudulent medical claim she'd filed over the past 5 years. Turns out, when you mess with someone who spends their days piecing together complex puzzles inside human bodies, you better make sure your own house is in order. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story starts with fire, steel, and the sound of hammer on anvil that apparently threatened the very foundation of our prestigious medical community here in Houston. Before I dive into this wild ride, I'm curious about something. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because I want to know if medical billing fraud is running this rampant everywhere or if Houston's got some special kind of corruption going on. And honestly, if your HOA president was stealing millions from insurance companies while trying to shut down your stress relief hobby, what would you have done? Keep that in mind as this story unfolds. My name is Dr. Nathaniel Bishop, but everyone calls me Nate. I'm an orthopedic surgeon here in Houston, specializing in complex sports injuries and reconstructive surgery. For the past 15 years, I've been putting athletes back together after they've pushed their bodies beyond what nature intended. It's demanding work. Some days I'm in surgery for 20 hours straight, rebuilding shattered bones and torn ligaments with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. But here's the thing about surgery that most people don't realize. It's all about having the right tools for the job. And sometimes the tools you need simply don't exist in any medical supply catalog. That's where my forge comes in. My great-great-grandfather was a blacksmith in rural Pennsylvania back in the 1800s. Family legend says he crafted medical instruments for country doctors who couldn't afford the fancy stuff from the big cities. When my wife Sarah was still alive, she tracked down his original anvil and tool set through some genealogy research project. Gave them to me for our 10th wedding anniversary with this huge grin, saying I was carrying on the family tradition of fixing people with metal. Sarah always got my weird hobbies. While other surgeons collected wine or played golf, I found peace in the ancient rhythm of heating steel, shaping it with hammer blows, creating something useful from raw metal. There's something meditative about it. The roar of the coal forge, the shower of sparks, the satisfaction of turning a chunk of iron into a precision instrument. After Sarah's death 2 years ago, cancer, the kind that laughs at all your medical training, the forge became my sanctuary. Some guys drink, some guys chase women, some guys buy sports cars. Me? I pound hot metal until the grief stops clawing at my chest. My garage workshop isn't just a hobby space. It's a legitimate part of my medical practice. I've forged custom retractors for spinal surgeries, specialized bone clamps for pediatric orthopedics, even unique microsurgery instruments that have been featured in medical journals. Last year, I created a set of separation tools for conjoined twin surgery that Johns Hopkins requested blueprints for. The work I do in that forge has saved lives. Real, documented, peer-reviewed lives. But apparently, none of that mattered to the Canterbury Commons Homeowners Association. Priscilla Huntington Smith moved into our neighborhood 3 years ago with the kind of fanfare that makes you immediately suspicious. Designer moving truck, interior decorator following behind, and within a week she was knocking on doors, introducing herself as your new HOA president. Despite the fact that we hadn't actually voted yet, she had this way of talking that made every conversation feel like a medical consultation where you're the patient with the embarrassing problem. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, always dressed like she was heading to the country club, and this smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Dr. Bishop," she'd say, dragging out the title like it was some kind of inside joke. "Such important work you do. We're so lucky to have someone of your caliber in our little community." The thing about Priscilla that bothered me from day one wasn't her obvious social climbing or even her transparent power hunger. It was that she claimed to understand medicine. She'd drop medical terms into casual conversation, reference administrative procedures, talk about insurance protocols like she'd spent years in the field. Turns out she had. Before becoming our self-appointed neighborhood dictator, Priscilla had worked as a medical billing administrator for various Houston clinics. She knew the system inside and out, which should have been my first red flag. But like most surgeons, I was focused on my work and figured HOA politics would sort themselves out. How naive was that? The first shot across my bow came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was getting ready for a complex knee reconstruction when my doorbell rang. Priscilla stood there with a clipboard and that plastic smile, flanked by 2 other board members I barely recognized. "Dr. Bishop, we need to discuss your industrial activities." I was still in my scrubs, coffee in hand, trying to process what she meant by industrial activities, when she launched into this prepared speech about fire hazards and inappropriate commercial usage in residential areas. "Your coal forge represents a significant risk to property values and resident safety," she read from her clipboard. "The Canterbury Commons CC&Rs strictly prohibit industrial activities and were requiring immediate cessation of all metalworking operations." I stood there blinking at her like she'd just told me my stethoscope was a banned weapon. "Priscilla, it's a hobby. I make surgical instruments in my spare time." "Commercial medical device manufacturing," she corrected, scribbling notes, "which requires FDA oversight, proper ventilation systems, and commercial zoning permits." That's when I knew this wasn't really about fire safety or property values. This woman had done her homework, knew exactly what buttons to push to make my life complicated. She handed me a formal notice giving me 21 days to cease all industrial operations and remove fire hazards from the premises. The language was legal enough to sound official, but vague enough to mean whatever she wanted it to mean. I should have fought back right then, should have realized this was just the opening move in a much bigger game. Instead, I tried to reason with her. The reasonable approach lasted exactly 1 week. I called Priscilla, explained the historical significance of my great-great-grandfather's tools, offered to give the board a tour of my setup to show them how safely everything was configured. I even brought up the medical applications, thinking that might appeal to her supposed healthcare background. Her response was to show up the next morning with a photographer and a measuring tape. "For the violation documentation," she explained as her assistant snapped pictures of my anvil like it was evidence in a murder trial. "The fine structure is $750 per day of continued noncompliance, effective immediately. $750 per day." My coal forge, the same one I'd been using safely for 5 years, was suddenly generating more daily penalties than most people's mortgage payments. That afternoon, the fire department showed up for a routine safety inspection based on anonymous complaints about improper storage of combustible materials. The fire marshal was a decent guy named Rodriguez who actually seemed embarrassed to be there. He poked around my workshop, tested my ventilation system, checked my coal storage setup. "Doctor, I gotta be honest," he said quietly while his partner was outside filling out paperwork. "This is one of the cleanest, safest setups I've seen. Better than half the commercial shops in the city. Someone's really got it out for you." He couldn't say much more officially, but he made sure to document that everything was up to code. Fat lot of good that did me. The next day, another anonymous complaint. This time about unusual smoke patterns that were allegedly triggering neighborhood asthma attacks. The day after that, someone reported excessive noise from my industrial hammering, despite the fact that I only worked in the evenings and had never gotten a single noise complaint in 5 years. I started keeping a log of the harassment, dates, times, nature of complaints. My surgical training kicked in, document everything, build a case file, approach problems methodically. But Priscilla was building her own case file, and she had resources I didn't know about yet. The escalation happened faster than I could have imagined. Within 2 weeks, what started as a simple HOA complaint had somehow morphed into a federal regulatory nightmare. I got a call at the hospital from someone claiming to be with the FDA's medical device division. They wanted to schedule an inspection of my manufacturing facility to ensure compliance with good manufacturing practice regulations. "I'm sorry, what manufacturing facility?" I asked, thinking there had been some mistake. "The metalworking operation at your residential address where you produce medical instruments for commercial sale." My blood pressure probably spiked enough to trigger my own cardiac alerts. "It's a hobby workshop. I don't sell anything commercially." "Sir, we have documentation indicating otherwise. Please have your quality management system records ready for review." Quality management system records for a garage workshop with a century-old anvil. I spent my lunch break calling lawyers, trying to figure out how a simple HOA complaint had escalated to federal oversight. The attorney I finally reached explained it in terms that made my stomach drop. Someone filed a formal complaint alleging that you're manufacturing medical devices without proper licensing. The FDA takes that seriously. Patient safety is their primary concern. If they determine you're operating an unlicensed facility, they can seize equipment and potentially refer the case for criminal prosecution. Criminal prosecution? For making surgical instruments in my garage. That evening, I found a certified letter in my mailbox from the Texas Medical Board. Someone had filed an ethics complaint claiming I was engaging in unsafe medical practices by using non-regulated instruments in surgery. The complaint was anonymous, but the medical terminology was precise, professional. Whoever filed it knew exactly how to navigate the regulatory system to cause maximum damage. I sat in my garage that night, looking at my great-great-grandfather's tools, feeling like I was standing in quicksand. Every move I made seemed to make things worse. But here's what I didn't understand yet. This wasn't random harassment. Priscilla Huntington Smith had a very specific reason for wanting me neutralized, and it had nothing to do with fire safety or property values. It had everything to do with the fact that I was about to become famous in the medical world, and fame brings scrutiny. The kind of scrutiny that can expose insurance fraud schemes built on fake medical procedures. The break in the case came from an unexpected source: international media attention. 3 weeks into my HOA nightmare, I got a call from Dr. Elizabeth Chen at Texas Children's Hospital. She was heading up a team preparing to separate conjoined twins, and they needed specialized instruments that didn't exist in any medical catalog. "Nate, I know you're dealing with some HOA issues, but this is urgent. We need retraction clamps with specific angular configurations for this separation. Can you help?" The twins were joined at the spine and shared several critical blood vessels. The surgical approach required instruments that could provide precise retraction without compromising circulation, basically tools that would have to be designed from scratch for this specific anatomy. Despite everything happening with Priscilla's harassment campaign, I couldn't turn down a case like this. These kids needed surgery that could only happen with the right tools, and I was apparently the only person in Houston who could make those tools. I spent 3 days in my forge, working by candlelight after dark to avoid triggering more noise complaints. The clamps had to be perfect: smooth surfaces to prevent tissue damage, specific angles to match the surgical approach, strength to hold retraction for potentially 8 hours of surgery. The operation was scheduled for the following week. Dr. Chen's team had invited medical observers from around the world. This was going to be a landmark case that would be studied for years. That's when Priscilla made her biggest mistake. The morning before the surgery, she showed up at my door with what looked like a police escort. Turns out it was a process server with a court order, but the intimidation factor was the same. "Dr. Bishop, by order of the Canterbury Commons HOA Board, you are hereby prohibited from removing any equipment or materials from this premises pending resolution of the commercial licensing violations." She was trying to prevent me from taking my instruments to the hospital. "Priscilla, there are 2 kids who need surgery tomorrow. These instruments are essential to the procedure." Then perhaps you should have considered that before engaging in unlicensed medical device manufacturing. That's when I knew this woman wasn't just power-hungry or petty. She was actively trying to sabotage my medical practice, potentially at the cost of patient care. I called my attorney, who managed to get an emergency injunction allowing me to use the instruments for the surgery. But the damage was done. Word was spreading through the medical community that I was facing regulatory problems. The twin separation surgery was a complete success. The instruments performed exactly as designed, allowing Dr. Chen's team to complete the separation safely and efficiently. Medical journals were already requesting articles about the custom tool design, but instead of celebrating, I was dealing with reporters asking about the controversy surrounding Dr. Bishop's unlicensed medical device manufacturing. That's the moment I realized Priscilla hadn't just been harassing me randomly. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation in the medical community, using my own success against me, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why. The answer came from the most unlikely source: my own medical insurance paperwork. My attorney had advised me to document everything related to the HOA case, including any potential financial impacts. Since Priscilla was claiming my forge was a commercial operation, we needed to prove it was purely personal hobby expenses. I was gathering receipts and insurance documentation when something in my homeowner's policy caught my attention. There was a section covering professional liability for home-based medical activities that I'd never noticed before. The insurance company had apparently been notified about my medical device manufacturing and wanted to review my coverage. They'd sent me a questionnaire asking for details about procedures I'd supposedly performed, medical services I'd allegedly billed for. But here's the thing: the procedures listed weren't ones I'd ever performed. Complex cardiac surgeries that weren't even in my specialty area. Neurosurgery procedures I wasn't qualified to perform. Multiple surgeries allegedly performed on the same date, sometimes 15 or 20 procedures in a single day. I stared at the paperwork, my surgical training kicking in. These billing patterns were physically impossible. No surgeon, no matter how skilled, could perform 20 cardiac bypasses in one day. The human body can't maintain that level of precision for that long, and hospitals don't have enough operating rooms to accommodate that schedule. Someone was billing insurance companies for procedures that had never happened. That's when it clicked. Priscilla's background in medical billing administration. Her desperate attempts to shut down my forge before the twin separation surgery brought international attention. Her systematic campaign to discredit me in the medical community. She wasn't just trying to exercise HOA authority, she was protecting a medical fraud operation. I called Dr. Martinez, a colleague who works closely with insurance companies on billing compliance. I explained what I'd found, asked if he'd ever seen anything like it. "Nate, what you're describing sounds like a major billing fraud scheme. If someone's been filing claims for procedures that never happened, we're talking federal crimes. Medicare fraud, insurance fraud. This could be millions of dollars. But how would someone pull that off? Don't insurance companies verify procedures? The system relies heavily on documentation from medical administrators. If someone has access to patient files and knows how to manipulate billing codes, they could potentially file claims for years before getting caught. The pieces were falling into place. Priscilla's medical background gave her access to billing systems. Her position as HOA president provided social cover and community respectability, and my growing reputation in the medical community posed a threat to her operation. If I became too visible, too connected to major medical institutions, someone might start looking more closely at billing patterns in our neighborhood, patterns that could expose her fraud. But I needed proof, real evidence, not just suspicious paperwork and educated guesses. That's when I remembered something my wife Sarah used to say: if you want to catch a liar, make them tell the same lie twice. Building a case against medical fraud required everything I'd learned about methodical investigation during my surgical training. You don't just operate based on hunches, you gather data, test theories, document everything. I started by mapping out the insurance billing patterns I'd discovered. Using my access to medical databases through the hospital, I cross-referenced procedure codes with actual patient records, surgery schedules, and facility utilization. What I found was staggering. Over the past 5 years, someone had been filing insurance claims for procedures performed by surgeons who weren't even in town on the dates listed. Cardiac operations allegedly performed while the surgeon was at conferences. Neurosurgery procedures billed during the surgeon's vacation weeks. The most damning evidence was a series of claims for procedures performed on patients who had died weeks before the alleged surgery dates. I reached out to Dr. Patricia Williams, a medical ethicist I'd worked with on several complex cases. She specialized in healthcare fraud investigation and had connections with both insurance companies and federal investigators. Nate, if what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at one of the largest medical billing fraud schemes in Texas history. This could be 8 figures in stolen funds. She helped me understand the mechanics of the fraud. Someone with administrative access could file claims using legitimate surgeon credentials, real patient information, and valid procedure codes. The insurance companies would pay out automatically as long as the paperwork looked correct. The genius of this scheme is that it targets procedures that generate high reimbursement rates, complex surgeries that insurance companies expect to pay premium rates for. A single cardiac surgery claim could net $15,000 to $20,000. We estimated that over 5 years, the fraud had generated somewhere between $8 and $12 million in stolen insurance payments. But we still needed to connect it directly to Priscilla. That's where my surgical colleagues became invaluable allies. Dr. Chen, still grateful for the twin separation instruments, helped me access billing records for procedures allegedly performed by surgeons in her network. Dr. Rodriguez from orthopedics ran queries on his patients who were supposedly receiving follow-up surgeries they'd never actually had. Within 2 weeks, we had documented over 2,000 fraudulent claims, all processed through billing systems that Priscilla had access to through her various medical administration contracts. The insurance companies she was defrauding had a combined annual budget of over $2 billion. She was stealing from the same system that paid for legitimate medical care for millions of Texans. But here's what really made my blood boil. Some of those fraudulent claims were for pediatric procedures. She was billing insurance companies for surgeries on kids who had never needed treatment, essentially stealing money that should have gone to actual sick children. Meanwhile, she was still harassing me daily about my forge, filing new complaints, trying to get me shut down by any regulatory agency that would listen. The irony was perfect. She was committing actual federal crimes while accusing me of regulatory violations for making surgical instruments in my garage. The final confrontation was inevitable, but I wanted to choose the time and place. Priscilla had been escalating her harassment campaign, apparently getting desperate as the twin separation surgery brought more positive attention to my work. Her latest move was filing a complaint with the state medical board, claiming I was performing unauthorized clinical trials using experimental instruments. She'd somehow obtained patient records, probably through her administrative access, and was alleging that I'd endangered patients by using untested medical devices. That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. She was now directly attacking my medical practice, potentially endangering my license and my patients' trust. I decided to end this at the next HOA board meeting. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the community center. I arrived early, setting up my laptop and organizing the evidence I'd compiled over the past month. Insurance billing records, patient files, surgical schedules, everything needed to demonstrate the scope of Priscilla's fraud scheme. Dr. Chen came as my witness, along with Dr. Martinez and 3 other colleagues who'd helped with the investigation. The hospital's chief of staff, Dr. Amanda Foster, also attended after I briefed her on what I'd discovered. The meeting started routinely enough. Discussion of landscaping budgets, pool maintenance schedules, the usual suburban politics. Priscilla ran the meeting with her typical authoritarian style, clearly enjoying her role as neighborhood dictator. When we got to new business, she immediately launched into her prepared presentation about my ongoing violations. Dr. Bishop continues to operate an unlicensed medical device manufacturing facility in direct violation of HOA regulations and federal oversight requirements. The board has voted to impose daily fines of $1,000 until compliance is achieved. $1,000 per day. She was escalating the financial pressure, probably hoping I'd give up and shut down my forge rather than face bankruptcy. Furthermore, she continued, we have documentation that Dr. Bishop has been using experimental instruments in surgical procedures without proper FDA approval or patient consent. This represents a serious threat to community reputation and potential legal liability. She was reading from prepared notes, using medical terminology with the confidence of someone who'd spent years in the healthcare system. To the other board members, she probably sounded like an expert protecting the community from a rogue doctor. That's when I stood up. Priscilla, since you seem so concerned about medical ethics and proper procedures, maybe you can help explain some irregularities I've discovered in local insurance billing patterns. I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projector. The first slide showed a summary of fraudulent claims I'd documented. Dates, procedures, amounts billed. For instance, can you explain how Dr. Rodriguez apparently performed 15 cardiac bypass surgeries on the same Tuesday, including 3 operations on patients who had died the previous month? The room went dead silent. Priscilla's face went pale, but she tried to maintain her composure. I have no idea what you're implying, Dr. Bishop, but this is neither the time nor place for... Or how about this billing pattern? I continued, clicking to the next slide. 27 pediatric neurosurgeries allegedly performed by Dr. Chen during the week she was attending a conference in Switzerland? Dr. Chen spoke up from the audience. I can confirm I was in Geneva that entire week. Those procedures never happened. I could see Priscilla calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much I could prove. She was trapped between denying knowledge and accidentally confessing to crimes. The interesting thing about medical billing fraud, I said, advancing to my next slide, is that it requires inside knowledge of procedure codes, access to patient files, and familiarity with insurance company protocols, the kind of expertise someone might gain from years of working as a medical billing administrator. That's when she snapped. You have no proof of anything. This is harassment, defamation, and I'll sue you for every penny you have. Actually, I do have proof. I clicked to a slide showing her name on billing administrator contracts for 3 Houston clinics. Your administrative access at these facilities would give you everything needed to file fraudulent claims: patient records, surgeon schedules, procedure code databases. The other board members were staring at her like they'd never seen her before. The facade of respectability was cracking in real time. And here's what really convinced me, I said, bringing up my final evidence slide. The billing patterns show detailed knowledge of which procedures generate the highest insurance payouts: cardiac surgery, neurosurgery, complex orthopedics. Exactly the specialties you'd target if you wanted to maximize fraud revenue. Dr. Foster stood up from the audience. Priscilla, these are serious accusations. If Dr. Bishop is correct, you could be facing federal charges. That's when Priscilla made her final mistake. Instead of staying quiet or calling a lawyer, she tried to bluff her way out. This is ridiculous. I've never filed false insurance claims. I don't even have access to those billing systems anymore. Actually, I said, clicking to a screenshot of recent billing activity, these claims were filed as recently as last week, using your administrative credentials at Memorial Healthcare. I'd saved the best evidence for last, real-time documentation showing her actively filing fraudulent claims even while she was harassing me about my forge. The room erupted. Board members were shouting questions. My medical colleagues were taking notes, and Priscilla was backing toward the exit like a cornered animal. This meeting is over, she announced, grabbing her papers and heading for the door. Actually, said a voice from the back of the room, this meeting is just getting started. FBI agent Sarah Thompson stepped into the room, followed by 2 other agents and an investigator from the Texas Department of Insurance. Priscilla Huntington Smith, you're under arrest for healthcare fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The aftermath moved faster than anyone expected. Within hours of Priscilla's arrest, federal investigators were seizing records from 3 Houston medical facilities where she'd had administrative access. The insurance companies launched their own investigations, freezing assets and tracing fraudulent payments. The final tally was staggering: over $12 million, stolen through more than 3,000 fake medical procedures over 5 years. The scheme had been so sophisticated that insurance companies had been paying out claims without question, trusting the legitimate-looking documentation. Priscilla was facing 25 years in federal prison and $8 million in restitution. They never did recover all the stolen money. Her house in Canterbury Commons went into immediate foreclosure, and her assets were seized for victim compensation. The medical community rallied around my case, with several major hospitals issuing statements supporting traditional craftsmanship and surgical instrument design. Johns Hopkins announced they were establishing a research partnership to study my forging techniques, and the Smithsonian requested my great-great-grandfather's tools for a medical history exhibit. My HOA harassment case became a textbook example in legal circles, how administrative power can be weaponized to protect criminal activity. The Canterbury Commons Board issued a formal apology and designated my garage workshop as a community historical site. But the real victory wasn't the legal vindication or professional recognition. 3 months after Priscilla's arrest, I got a call from Dr. Chen. Another set of conjoined twins needed surgery, and they wanted the same separation instruments I'd forged for the previous case. That evening, I fired up my coal forge and heated my great-great-grandfather's steel. The rhythm of hammer on anvil filled my garage workshop, the same sound that had driven Priscilla Huntington Smith to destroy her own life trying to silence it. Sarah would have loved the irony, a woman so concerned with appearances and social status, brought down by her greed, and a surgeon who just wanted to make better tools for saving lives. Sometimes the old ways really are the best ways, and sometimes when you try to extinguish someone's fire, you end up getting burned yourself. My forge is still running strong, still creating instruments that help surgeons save lives. And every time I hear that coal fire roar and feel the steel take shape under my hammer, I remember that some things are worth fighting for, even if it means taking down a corrupt HOA president in the process. The sound of justice being forged, one hammer blow at a time.